Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I am delighted to welcome back on the show my good friend Nir Eyal, who was last seen here on episode 218, talking about his best-selling book, Indistractable. So Nir is also the author of Hooked. And today we're talking about his new book that is being published tomorrow, titled Beyond Belief: The science-backed way to stop limiting yourself and achieve breakthrough results. Nir, welcome to the show.
Great to be back. Thanks, Will.
So, Nir, maybe before we dive into my specific questions for readers who haven't yet read it, and they probably haven't because it's coming out tomorrow, give us kind of the main overview of the three-part structure of your book.
Absolutely. So Beyond Belief is, I think, this macro read that helps you then process all kinds of other wisdom that's out there in the world. For me, the big problem that I had, and I only write books about things that I need to fix in myself, right? Some authors write about what they know. I write about what I want to know. And so for Beyond Belief, what I wanted to know was why I had all these books giving me all this great advice. I had infinite resources online for people I could, learn from and reach out to. And, I kind of felt like we're drowning in information these days. And yet somehow the information wasn't being put into practice. I have bookshelves full of books. I have gurus I paid for advice that I haven't implemented. I've had consultants I've paid for. Why don't we put the things we know into practice? And so it doesn't matter how much information fills our heads. If we don't put it to good use, then it's might as well we that we didn't hear in the first place. And so that's really what Beyond Belief tries to tackle. It's a book, actually. It's a motivation book. It's a book about the psychology of motivation disguised as a book about beliefs. Because what I learned was, number one, that the most important defining trait, the trait that is most consistent with success in life, is not what you'd expect. It's not intelligence. It is correlated. Intelligence is correlated with different kinds of success in life. It's not necessarily getting lucky, right? Other than like who you are born to, that you're getting lucky, but things that happen to you turns out are not necessarily what correlates most with success. What correlates most with success is perseverance, is continuing, right? Is even when things get tough, do you persevere through the hard times? And that turns out to be a defining trait. That and adaptability is two most important traits. And so I wanted to figure out what it was about these people who could persevere and be adaptable. And it turns out that the secret is that they believe different things than the rest of us. That motivation, we think about like a straight line. That motivation goes from giving people what they want, and then they will do the behavior you want them to do, right? That's how our jobs are set up. You get a salary if you do the job description. But there's a hidden component. If it was good enough to just tell people what to do, the behavior and why they should do it, the benefit, then we'd all have six-pack abs and be multimillionaires. But that's not how it works, because the missing component is, of course, belief. That motivation is more like a triangle than a straight line, that you can have a behavior knowing what to do. You can have the benefit knowing why you should do it. But if you don't have the belief at the base of the triangle, then the triangle collapses. So you have to have those beliefs in both the benefit, that you will get the benefit, right? That you get what you expect to receive, that you trust whoever's giving you that benefit. And oftentimes the trust in yourself, the belief that you can do the behavior. And so it turns out that our beliefs shape what we see, what we feel, and what we do. So these beliefs are the mechanics of how we sustain motivation, because how we see the world, how we feel the world, and what we do in the world is determined by what we believe.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories from the book that you share about beliefs in terms of what we see is the story of, well, there's two. The one about the Toyota versus the GM Prism, and also the
Yeah.
one about the cheap versus the expensive glass of wine. Maybe tell
Yeah,
us
absolutely.
about those.
Sure. So, I mean, this research really fascinated me around how beliefs can literally shape what we see, and not just, I'm not just saying in the figurative way where we say that seeing is believing. It actually turns out to be just as true that the opposite is the case. That believing is seeing. It's not just that I'll believe it when I see it. It's that our beliefs change what we see, literally change what we see. We know that people on diets see food as larger. We know that people who are afraid of heights see distances as further. And so some good examples of this have to do with our perception of brands. That the example that you mentioned was a few decades ago when this factory in California at NUMMI had two identical cars roll off the production line. One was a Toyota and one was a Geo. Prism was the name of the car, made by GM. Now this was a joint factory between Toyota and GM, and they produced these cars that were everything was identical. The chassis was identical. Everything was identical except the moniker, right? Except the name of the car. That was really the only difference. And what was amazing is that even though the cars were identical, one was ranked very highly on customer satisfaction, and one was ranked very low on customer satisfaction, even though it was the exact same car. Now, why would that happen? It's because people saw the car differently. That when it was the cheap GM brand, they thought, they heard a rattle and they thought must be something wrong with the transmission. Whereas they gave the Toyota the benefit of the doubt that it's a well-made car. Nah, there's nothing wrong with it. And so it literally affected how they perceived the car itself, even though it was identical car. The same happens when we think about luxury goods like wine, how we perceive wine, that we know that the perception of price, the label of price, drastically affects how people experience the wine. There was a study done by Babashiv at Stanford, and he took people and he put them into an fMRI machine so he could scan their brains. And he looked for blood flow in their brain as they experienced two sips of wine. He gave them a little tube and he said, okay, well, I'm going to give you right now, this is a $45 bottle of wine. What do you think of the wine? Oh, I taste the oak. I taste the hints of berry. Oh, it's got an earthy finish, whatever, all the stuff that wine snobs say. And then he said, okay, now I'm going to give you a $5 bottle of wine. I want you to tell me how this wine tastes. Well, it's a little flat on the finish. It's not as good as the last wine I had. Of course, there's a trick. There's a trick. The trick is they were the exact same wine. The only difference was that one group was told it was a $45 bottle of wine. The other group was told it was a $5 bottle of wine. Now, that's all nice and interesting. Maybe the people lied. Turns out we know they didn't, at least to some degree, because we could actually see what was happening in their brains. Remember, they were in an fMRI machine. So what was happening is that these people weren't just saying the $45 bottle of wine was better because that's what they thought that the researcher would expect. Actually, inside their brains expected the wine to be better, the expensive wine to be better, and they actually perceived it differently because we saw that brain centers associated with rewards lit up more brightly when there was an expectation that they were consuming the more expensive wine. So it wasn't just that they were saying the wine tasted better, it actually did really taste better to them just because this factor of price was revealed to them.
Okay. So let's say we accept this and it makes sense, right? Like certainly we all familiar with the case where when you learn a new word, you start seeing it all over the place, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this sort of when something becomes salient to you, you start noticing it more. So okay, so we take your word and we believe that believing is seeing, right? So let's say we say, okay, I want to do something about that. Great. What do you recommend on how to, let's say, do some kind of belief inventory so we can see the water that we're swimming in if we're a fish so that we can identify them and then start thinking about, okay, here's my beliefs. They may or may not be true, but which ones are useful, right? And then try to strengthen the ones or find or add ones that are useful and discard ones that are not. So if we take your point that believing is seeing, what do we do about it? How do we identify our beliefs?
Well, are you asking, we can look at this multiple different lenses. Are you asking in terms of our individual lives or maybe in terms of our work lives, in terms of the brands we build, the companies we work with? Which one do you want to tackle first?
Why don't we sort of build off chapter 2, the secret to
Sure.
better relationships? That's maybe a good way to illustrate it. Of you offer some conscious, frameworks of ways to question yourself to identify these beliefs about maybe people, the relationships of people in our lives. Why
Yeah.
don't you
Yeah.
illustrate it with that chapter?
Sure. I mean, so the big point of the book, the big lesson of the book is that beliefs are tools, not truths. And this to me was a pretty revealing insight that took me a long time to uncover that beliefs are not facts, that facts are objective truths, right? The world is more like a sphere than it is round. Doesn't care what you think, doesn't care what you believe. That is an objective truth. Then on the other end of the spectrum, there's faith. Now, a faith is a conviction that does not require evidence. God rewards the righteous. No evidence is needed for something like that. What happens in the afterlife? That's a faith-based conviction. But then there's something in the middle. In the middle is what we call a belief. A belief is defined as a conviction, a strongly held conviction, open to revision based on new evidence. And so what I contend is that our life would be so much better. In fact, the world would be so much better if we understood these powers of belief. That I believe that most of our problems in the world today, whether it's personal problems, interpersonal problems, relationship problems, societal problems, come from the fact that too many people take their faith as facts, the things that they put unquestioned faith in as facts. Not that there isn't a place for faith, absolutely there is, but a lot of the things that people don't question, they believe are facts, and that many of the things that people believe are facts are nothing more than beliefs and should be held as beliefs. And so when we loosen this noose around our necks, around thinking that all beliefs must be objectively true, we give ourselves new lenses to look at the world through. And it really solves so many of our problems. It certainly did in my life. I have benefited so greatly writing this book. It really did change my life. So many practices that I've now adopted that I didn't before. A big one of these is around my relationships. For example, I'll kind of share this very personal story that I discussed a little bit in the book as well about this incident that happened with my mom. That for my mom's 75th birthday, I wanted to be a very good son and I wanted to buy her some flowers. The problem was I was in Singapore, she was in Central Florida, and there was no shipper from from Singapore to Central Florida. So I had to stay up late and call florists and see if they would deliver to where my mom was and look at Google reviews. And some of them didn't order online and some had crappy reviews. And so I really wanted to make it right. So I stayed up very late. I stayed up till 1 a.m. I found the right florist. I called to confirm that the flowers were going to be on the way to my mom for her birthday. I went to sleep. I said, "Oh, Nir, you're a good son. Good job." I went to bed, and then I woke up the next morning and I called my mom to wish her a happy birthday. And she picked up the phone and she said, "Thank you very much, Nir. But just so you know, those flowers were half dead. And you should probably call the florist because they did not look good." To which I immediately time traveled from my 47-year-old body into my 15-year-old body, and I became this obnoxious teenager. And out came this. I said, "Well, that's the last time I buy you anything."
Oh, geez.
And that went over just about as well as you'd expect.
Oh, man.
And afterwards, my wife was sitting next to me and she heard this whole conversation. And she turned to me and she said, "Do you want to do the work on this?" And she was referencing the work of Byron Katie, who I'm a big fan of. She's distilled down this process that's been handed down for thousands of years, but most people have kind of forgotten it. Actually, Aristotle had a very similar process, and I'll tell you what this is. Basically, it's these four questions that we have to ask. And these four questions allow us to take a different perspective on our beliefs. Okay, I call it collecting a portfolio of perspectives. And so what you first have to do is to identify what is that belief that you have. My belief that was causing me quite a bit of suffering was my mother is too judgmental and hard to please. So I wrote that down. My mother is too judgmental and hard to please. The first question is very simple. And I can't take credit for these questions. These come from Byron Katie, but they've changed my life. The first question is it true? Is it true that my mother is too judgmental and hard to please? Will, you heard what happened, right? Clearly, I'm in the right here. My mother was very clearly too judgmental and hard to please. No doubt about it, right? Okay, fine. The second question, is it absolutely true? Is it absolutely true? Is it a fact? Because a fact has to always be true. A fact can't be sometimes true. The world can't be sometimes a sphere and sometimes flat. It's either one or the other, right? So is it absolutely true that my mother is too judgmental and hard to please? Absolutely. Not even a 1% chance ever that she's not too judgmental and hard to please, even in this situation? Okay, maybe. I guess there could be a situation where she wasn't too judgmental and hard to please. There could be maybe an interpretation. I don't know what that interpretation is, but yes, maybe there is that interpretation. Okay, the third question. Who am I when I hold this belief? So how do I behave? What kind of person do I become when I hold this belief that my mother is too judgmental and hard to please? Well, to be honest, I reverted to my teenage tendencies. I wasn't my best self. I said something I later regretted. And I was angry and I was impatient. I wasn't a great person when I held on to that conviction. Okay, great. Fourth question. Who would I be without that belief? I guess if there was a magic wand that somehow would deprogram me to believe that my mother is too judgmental and hard to please, I probably would be more patient. I'd be more loving. I would be a better listener to her. I would probably be a better son. Okay, so I've established this belief was not serving me. This is what we call a limiting belief, a belief that saps your motivation, as opposed to a liberating belief that supplies motivation. Very clear, this was the definition of a limiting belief. It was sapping my motivation to be in a relationship with my mother. And now I did what's called a turnaround. So, a turnaround is when we try and collect this portfolio of perspectives by doing sometimes the diametric opposite of that belief. So the first turnaround is how can I make that sentence, my mother is too judgmental and hard to please? How can I turn around? Well, very simply, my mother is not too judgmental and hard to please. How could that be true? How could my mother not be too judgmental and hard to please? That my initial reaction was, oh no, that's crazy. I don't want this psychobabble, woo-woo talk. This is silly. This won't work. But then I sat with it for a little bit. And I started to understand that actually, you know what? I mean, she did thank me for the flowers, right? She did say thank you. So maybe, maybe she wasn't being judgmental. Maybe she was just stating a fact, right? Like maybe she was just trying to tell me, hey, I don't want you to get scammed. Okay, that's one interpretation. Let me do another turnaround. Okay, this is called turnaround to the self. I am too judgmental and hard to please. Oof. Wait a minute. I am too judgmental and hard to please. That's a tough one. How does that work? Well, I guess I was expecting her to thank me in just exactly the right words that I demanded her to say in exactly the way that I had pre-programmed in my head that I had wanted her to say. So I was being quite judgmental and hard to please, wasn't I? And then here's another turnaround. That this is where I could turn around to say, I am too judgmental and hard to please to myself. Mm. I mean, I get goosebumps even telling it to you. Well, to kind of make myself vulnerable here. I mean, that's what was going on, right? I had this very high bar that everything I did had to be perfect. That if I was going to send flowers to my mother, it had to be just the right flowers and she had to be perfectly happy with them. And if I messed up, then somehow that's a statement on me. That's what was really going on. So you see, I took a belief that I was dead sure was reality. My mother is definitely too judgmental and hard to please. And then by the end of this, by doing that very simple turnaround that anybody can do in just a few minutes, it's hard. You don't want to do it. Everything in your brain is saying, no, no, no. I want to believe what I want to believe, even though it's not serving you. And since I've started doing this practice of always thinking to myself, wait a minute, my beliefs are just tools. They're not truths. They're just tools. And it's not like we walk around saying, "Oh, this hammer is the one and only true hammer." No, sometimes we use a hammer. Sometimes we use a screwdriver. Sometimes we use a saw. It's not one ultimate true tool. We use different tools for the job. So that's how now I approach beliefs, and it's changed my life. And I think that practice can change millions of people's lives.
So, more generally, if we go beyond like relationships, I guess you can probably use the same framework for other types of situations, right? So, if you're saying, oh, how do I increase the sales of my company? You could start thinking about, okay, what are my beliefs about clients or about awareness or about how to find them and go through the same things. Is this belief true? Is it, am I certain that it's true?
Yeah.
And who am I when I believe this?
Yeah. I mean, what
Who would I
what
be?
what is company culture but a series of beliefs?
Yeah.
That's all company cultures. And what's interesting is that, I think a lot of folks, I went to business school at Stanford and we learned about company culture and every CEO that comes in, culture, 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 culture. Like that's the punchline of all business education. And if you talk to anybody who's made it in a business, at the end of the day, nobody will say, "Oh, it's all me." They'll say, "I had some great people who helped me." Right? That's the truth. And how do you get those people to do what you want them to do? And how do we all row in the right direction together to get the company where it needs to go? It's culture. What is culture? Culture is just codified beliefs. That's it. And they're communicated sometimes explicitly, but oftentimes, more often, they're communicated based on what people see, right? What do people prioritize? How does this company function? And that lens on how we view our colleagues, our customers, our shareholders, all those beliefs are what is essentially the operating system of our company. Our own beliefs are our operating system of the mind. The problem is that for everyone out there, every single person carries around these limiting beliefs. Companies certainly carry around crappy limiting beliefs all the time when they have a crappy culture that they don't realize they have. And the same thing happens to individuals. The same thing happens to families. It's almost like for an individual, it's almost like your face. We all have faces, but you can't see your own face unless you look in a mirror. And when you look in a mirror, you can finally see your face. And so we all carry around these limiting beliefs, right? These beliefs that have, for lack of a better term, gaslit us into certain limitations. I'm not a morning person. That's my ADHD again. I'm too old, too thin, too fat, too young. It's too late, right? How many times have we told ourselves these stupid limiting beliefs? These aren't facts. These aren't facts. They're not truths. They're beliefs. And so when we take them out, these sabotaging limiting beliefs that we all have. I've met billionaires, I've met people who are broke. We all have them in one area of our life or another, whether it's relationship, whether it's health, whether it's business. We all have these limiting beliefs. It's only when we take them out and we examine them that we can ask ourselves, wait a minute, why do I keep operating with this stupid limiting belief? Even if I have a hunch that it's true, it doesn't matter. Because first of all, we can't know, right? The vast majority of our decisions in life aren't made based on facts, right? Should I marry this person? Should I start this business? Should I take that promotion? Should I move to this city? These decisions aren't based on fact. They're based on beliefs. And so it's only when we start mastering that lens with which we see the world that we call beliefs that we can make these better decisions and live without regret and actually meet our full potential.
Yeah. Now, you criticize and make a point that you're not just talking about magical thinking. So in the book, you talk about how the power of positive thinking, there's actually can be some negatives on there. And this is not about just purely kind of wishful thinking. That's not what you're talking about when you're talking about these beliefs. And you have a concept, I think, of mental contrasting is one of the terms.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that distinction between, for us to evaluate what beliefs might be like magical thinking in your terminology, and what beliefs might be useful, not true, right? Beliefs that are
Right.
useful and actually do help us, whether or not that they're facts. How can you sort out and sort of determine if a belief that we have is one or the other?
Right. So this magical thinking, and unfortunately, Will, a lot of it is very popular these days, and it comes under all kinds of different monikers. Positive thinking, manifesting, vision boards. It's very, very popular these days. And it's not that these practices are all bad, it's that they're woefully incomplete to the extent that I didn't even realize can actively be harmful. I'll show you what I mean. There was a beautiful study done by Gabrielle Udigen, and she did this wonderful study where she hooked people up to machines that track their blood pressure as they were visualizing their future. So they were doing these manifestation exercises. They were picturing their beautiful futures. I will have a Lamborghini and a beautiful house and a nice family and all these things I want. And what she noticed was that as these people were doing these visualizations, these manifestations, their blood pressure was falling. They were becoming more and more relaxed over the people who were in the control condition. And in fact, she did these studies over and over again. These have been replicated many times. It turns out that people who do these type of manifestation visualization exercise where all they think about is the outcome actually are way less likely to actually go get those outcomes. Because what the brain is doing, it gets that sensation, that relaxation, that joy, that peace of, oh, I already have it. It starts visualizing this reality and thinks it's already got what you want. And so you actually become less likely to go get it. We've seen this they did a study on German students, college students, who became less likely to study. They did this on people trying to lose weight, who became less likely to diet because they were visualizing and manifesting, and they weren't, of course, doing. So that's where thinking becomes magical, where if I vibrate at the quantum level of the universe, that good things will just come to me. Folks, the universe doesn't give a about what you want. I hate to break it to you. There is no cosmic vibration, whatever, at least nothing that we've ever detected. And science is pretty good. Like people have been looking for a long time. However, people are right, but for the wrong reasons. That in fact, if you do have those visualization exercises, if you do have those manifestation exercises, but you finish the process, finishing the process is to do what's called mental contrasting. Mental contrasting is not just visualizing what you want. A lot of times you hear these half truths that, athletes will do visualization exercises. But you know what they're visualizing, Will? They're not visualizing when they get the medal. They're not visualizing when they win and they're on the way home with their trophy. That's not what they're visualizing. You know what they're visualizing? Their opponents. They're visualizing when I'm doing what I need to be doing, what's going to get in my way. And that's what works. Mental contrasting is not, oh, I'm visualizing my six-pack abs on the beach. The right visualizing, mental contrasting uses when I go to that dinner party and someone offers me a drink that's going to, cost me 300 calories, or that piece of chocolate cake, what am I going to do? When my opponent's coming at me, the thing that's in my way to get to my goals, I'm going to rehearse mentally what I'm going to do. Just like the basketball player that's thinking, okay, when someone's on defense, how am I going to get around them, right? That's the right way to do it. And so that's the difference between magical thinking and mental contrasting. Magical thinking just expects things to happen to you, right? If you let go and let God, right? There's a place for that. But if that's all you do, as opposed to a much smarter belief, is God helps those who help themselves, right? That's how the true magic happens, is through action, not just wishful thinking.
Mhm. Talk to me about prayer. I was particularly interested in the chapter about how prayer works, including without faith. So some
Yeah.
people may have prayed when they were young, like yourself, and then kind of given up on it as many people perhaps lost their belief in Almighty. But
Hmm.
you argue that there's value in prayer for a number of different reasons, even if you don't actually believe in God. So talk to us about
Right.
that a little bit.
Yeah, so this chapter I wrote for people who have faith. I think that's wonderful because as I studied the power of belief, of course, I came across the power of faith, and the studies are unequivocal that people who pray, they live longer, they're happier, they're less likely to suffer from depression. There's so many benefits to prayer. Unfortunately, uh, I didn't pray. And so I was a little jealous, to be honest, because I never, I used to pray when I was very, very young. I did talk to God when I was very young. And then I kind of gave it up as I got older. I kind of thought I was talking to nobody. And if I couldn't prove, if it wasn't a fact that God existed, if I didn't have perfect certainty that everything that I'd read in my religious tradition was true, well, then I wanted nothing to do with it. And for many, many years, that's how I was. And then I came across this amazing research around how prayer has incredible benefits, even without faith. And here's how it worked. They did an experiment where they taught people how to pray, people who hadn't prayed previously, and they allowed them to pray, to substitute God for whatever they wanted. It could be Mother Nature, it could be the sum of all forces, it could be something greater than myself. And then they compared how long those people could do a task, which I'll describe in a minute, compared to people who always prayed, compared to people who don't pray at all. The control group, no prayer whatsoever. So three groups. So people who never ever pray, people who do pray to some kind of faith, and people who were taught how to pray even without faith. Okay. Then they brought them into a room and they asked them to take their hand. This is a pretty common test. We do this in all kinds of different experiments on to measure pain tolerance. They asked them to take their hand and put it in a very cold bucket of water. Okay, painfully cold water. And then they simply observed these people. They noticed how they grimaced and how they didn't like it. And then, finally, how long they could stand being in this very, very cold water. And it turned out that people who had prayer based on faith, and even people who had prayer even without a religious tradition, both lasted way longer than the people who hadn't been trained in any form of prayer. So prayer does seem to have these protective effects. Like I said, longer life, more life satisfaction, less chance of depression, all these benefits, even without faith. And so I wanted to explore this further. So what did I do? I decided to interview five faith leaders. It sounds like I'm setting up a joke here, but it was a rabbi, a priest, a monk, an imam, and a swami. I went to these five religious teachers, and this isn't a representative sample, but I wanted to for myself. I don't think I'd never heard of anybody doing this before, but I wanted to go to each of these five religious leaders and ask them a simple question: how do I pray when I'm uncertain about God? Very simple question. And each one of them gave me an insight that I have since adopted in my life that has produced a practice, a ritual that has yielded immense benefit. It's really benefited me. And in a way, I've stopped asking about the supernatural because I think for a lot of people, the largest religious community in America today, the largest religious community in America today, it's the nuns, not N-U-N, not those kind of nuns, N-O-N-E, the people who don't affiliate with anything. That is the largest religious denomination in America, and it's growing fast. And many of these people say that they are spiritual, but not religious. And it turns out that's the worst of all worlds, that those people are the most likely to suffer from depression, spiritual, but not religious, because they don't have those rituals, which I think are incredibly important. I've since discovered, I didn't know this, but they are incredibly important for our psychological well-being. Because what does a faith community give us? It gives us a social context. It gives us repetition. It gives us these practices that help us deal with our pain, that help us get a sense of control over the uncontrollable. And so all these benefits I took from various faith traditions, and of course, most of them had overlapping insights as well. And so now I pray for the first time in my life. When I go by a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a Buddhist temple, if they'll let me in, I always go in and pray. And it's really benefited my life, and it's free. It doesn't cost anything, and it yields amazing results.
Yeah, when I was reading that chapter, I was thinking about, Julia Cameron's morning pages, and I was wondering if it was like a similar kind of mechanism of action where, she of course recommends first thing in the morning for 30 minutes, write longhand, 2 or 3 or 4 pages, just stream of consciousness. And I wonder if the benefit has something to do with just allowing your subconscious to come out and have a way to express itself and sometimes discover things, wisdom that you didn't have conscious access to, allowing that
Sure.
to come out. So,
Yeah,
um,
and in fact, prayer can be a form of problem solving. When you do it in a way where you are stating the problem, you are thinking about it, you're allowing yourself to problem solve with God or without, doesn't it may not in particular matter, but it can be a form of psychological problem solving that can benefit everyone. What I think those solitary practices don't give you, and this
mm,
came from the conversation I had with the priest, and the father was very insightful, and he said, many people come to church asking for things. God, help me find love. Help me solve this problem with my business. Help me, give me, give me, give me. It's almost like a cosmic slot machine. He said, that's not the purpose of prayer. The purpose of prayer is to come together and we solve our problems. We answer our prayers together. And so those solitary practices can't do that. Because what he told me was that when people come to church, turns out when they're looking for love, there might be somebody down the pew who is also looking for love. And if they're struggling with their business, there might be somebody that they meet who can help them with that problem. And so this is part, I think, of the reason why we have this loneliness epidemic in America. And it's a serious problem. It is a true epidemic of loneliness. Part of it is because people like me before didn't step foot in religious institutions because we thought, well, if it's not fact, I don't want anything to do with it. And I think we have given up way too much. We have given up these communities. There's something amazing about stepping into a place, a house of worship, where people have the obligation to take care of you and you have an obligation to take care of others. It's a beautiful thing that I think we kind of gave up with our big screen TVs and our exercise equipment at home, and everything we need is at home. We never need to leave the home. We can just watch Netflix and eat popcorn and go on our computers, and that's it. We just don't need anything else. And I think we made a huge mistake. We need people in our lives. And I think those religious institutions can give it, even if you don't believe in every word. What I have advocated for is a return to these institutions, and it's almost like a don't ask, don't tell policy, right? Nobody asks the Pope, "Hey, do you really believe Pope?" No, nobody asks him, and yet we have these like faith tests in many religious institutions where we want, you have to proclaim that you believe every single word. I think that's a big mistake. I think institutions should welcome people who want to be part of the community, and we should be more the practitioners, people who have not previously stepped foot in these places. We should be okay with substituting in our mind when we hear something we don't maybe 100% totally agree absolutely happen that way. We can be smart enough to substitute our own meaningful verbiage.
in the acknowledgments of your book, you thank James Clear for helping with the positioning of the book. I'd love to hear a little backstory behind that. What was possible positionings that you were considering? what were some of the things that you left out of the book? You must have had a lot of stuff that ended up on the shop floor.
Oh yeah. My wife is my editor, or is one of my editors. I have several, but she's the one that got the cover credit because she took my book and went and took a version that was 88,000 words and turned it into a version that's only 64,000 words. And so she did most of the heavy lifting on that. With James, it was more high level in terms of, excuse me, in terms of title, in terms of where would it sit in the on the bookshelf kind of categories. So he's an old friend. I've known him for years and years. He actually interviewed me back when he was writing Atomic Habits and mentioned some of my techniques in that book. So yeah, he helped me with some potential titles and subtitles. Actually, the reason it says at the top of the book says change your beliefs, change your life. That was his suggestion.
Huh.
Oh no, sorry, change your mind, change your life.
Change your mind, change your life. So, of course, the
Yeah.
author of Atomic Habits. Um, so, tell us a little bit about failure goals.
Hmm. Yeah, so this comes from the work of Tina Seelig at Stanford, and she sets what she calls failure goals, and this stems from this research around how uh, luck isn't chance. That it turns out that people who are more successful in life are not necessarily more lucky, right? We think of lucky people, successful people just get lucky, like good things just happen to them. Turns out when we study people, there isn't a bias for some people to just, better things happen to them. Statistically, they're successful people are just as lucky as anyone else. They just take advantage of opportunities differently. And it's fascinating. If you've ever talked to very successful people, what always struck me, and I've talked to billionaires and very, very successful people, they have failed a ton. I don't know any successful person who hasn't failed a lot. In fact, the people, it's exactly the opposite of what you'd expect. You'd expect, losers, people who think of themselves as losers. I'm not describing them as such, but people who think of themselves as not very successful. You would think they failed a lot. That's why they think of themselves so poorly. No, in fact, those people fail the least. It's the very successful people who fail the most because one tried, one persevered, and the other quit. And so what Tina Silik says is that we should in fact set these failure goals. That it's backwards. We measure ourselves by how we succeed, right? I tried this thing. I made these sales calls, and you know what? Nobody bought, or not enough people bought. Or I tried this business and it didn't work. Or I tried writing this blog post and not many people saw it. I don't know, whatever it might be. But we're measuring the wrong thing. That in fact, what we should measure is how many times we tried, because we know there's a direct correlation between how much you try and how successful you are likely to be. So the goal shouldn't be, I want this success. The goal should be, how many shots did I try? Right? How many shots on goal did I try? And if you try more shots, you're going to be more successful. So she sets these failure goals of literally counting out, I'm going to do this thing X number of times, and I expect to fail X number of times, and that's totally fine. That's the goal. And that's
Yeah,
how you get lucky.
it's focusing on your locus of control, right? So you
Exactly.
can't
Yeah.
control the outcomes, but it's less catchy. But thinking of it as process metrics, I want to send at least, you know, 20 outbound requests for a meeting every day, right?
Right.
And
Right.
a catchier way is I want 20 people a day to say no to my outreach. So
Yeah.
it's maybe
Yeah.
a flipping the way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Because it gives you something to celebrate. I think what's so hard is that when we only celebrate the wins and we don't celebrate the process, it's really hard, right? Like we all know what the ultimate goal is. We want to close those sales. We want to have a better relationship. We want to find love. We want to have a healthy body. We know what the end goal is. But when we only celebrate the outcome, which we can't always control, can become very demotivating, as opposed to this liberating belief of, I'm going to celebrate the process. I'm going to celebrate the journey. I'm going to celebrate the failures, because that's going to sustain me.
as I was reading your book, and places talk about, embracing or moving towards discomfort, right? So you're
Mm,
getting comfortable with discomfort. Um, One thing that I've been doing every day since
mm,
January 1st, 2023. So it's
mm.
now, well, I guess that's more than 1,000
3
days in a
years
row
now.
now.
Yeah.
Every morning, very first thing when I wake up, is I take a cold shower, um,
Okay.
which I still do not look forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one thing that I've learned from it, and it's a number of benefits. Like one is it super wakes you up, right?
Hmm.
You are super alert afterwards. But the other thing is sort of just a daily training to get comfortable stepping into situations that I'd prefer to avoid, because that's the first
Yeah.
one that I see every day. And every single day, I learn it's like the same thing. I have to learn it 1,000 times. Every single day, it's the first second or so is kind of bad, but after that, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And isn't that the lesson for life, right?
yeah.
That's with everything. And in fact, the only way through the best therapies we know is good old exposure therapy.
Yeah.
As much as I remember the first paper I wrote for this master's program I was in. Now I moved on from that, but I for my master's program in neuroscience, the very first paper was the question was, is talk therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, better than placebo?
Hmm.
And at first it was a very odd question. What are you talking about? Of course, talk therapy is better than placebo by far, right? No, not really. It turns out we have no clue how to make people better. Like it's the mind is so complicated
Hmm.
that it works for some people. Of course, CBTs have been very effective. I'm sure there's lots and lots of anecdotes, but turns
Yeah.
out most of the effect is in fact a placebo effect. Is the fact that you have some kind of intervention seems to
Yeah.
be the majority of the practice. That some human being will listen to you just like a good friend, and you pay them to talk about your problems, and that is the majority of the benefit. And so, whereas exposure therapy, where actually having that exposure to a stressful situation and then realizing I'm safe, nothing to be afraid of, this is fine, I got through it before, I can get through it again, incredibly protective. So, that exact circumstance. Now, what we don't exactly know is if we can generalize that. Like, well, there are people who can do some things that are very, very difficult and some things that they're super afraid of. And so it's not exactly clear if we can generalize across different areas, but common sense would allude that might be the case.
Give us two or three more examples of practices that you have changed since you started doing this research.
Yeah, for sure. So prayer is definitely one of them. Relationships, I've definitely have these new relationship practices that I've improved my relationships with my family, with my in-laws, with just everyday circumstances. And then another practice that kind of melds the two is that now I have these kind of daily mantras that constantly remind me to shed my limiting beliefs, that make me aware of my limiting beliefs. And so, simple things like annoyances, things that would piss me off, traffic or a baby crying on an airplane, or these everyday things that can really just tense you up for no good reason.
Yeah.
They're just limiting beliefs. They're
Oh, so what
just
are some
limiting
of the
beliefs.
mantras? What are the mantras?
Sure. So one of the mantras is that we are all working with the tools we have, right? That's one of them, that we're all working with the tools we have. So when someone cuts you off or you think they're acting in a rude way, this is an example of what we call the fundamental attribution error, that when someone else is being rude, it's because they're a jerk. But when we do something, well, let me explain to you why I had to do that thing, right? That why did I have to cut that other guy off? Well, it's because I had that little out. We never give the grace to the other person. Another mantra that I repeat all the time is love is measured by the benefit of the doubt. Love is measured by the benefit of the doubt. That's one I made up for myself because I found it very helpful. What does that mean? That, defining love, it's kind of a big philosophical question. What is love? How do we define it? How do we measure it? I measure it by how much benefit of the doubt I give to somebody. So, for example, when my daughter was born, she didn't do anything for me, right? Like love can't be measured by how good someone makes you feel and what they do for you, right? That's a crappy metric. My daughter didn't do anything. All she did was poop and cry and eat. Like she didn't do anything for me. And yet, the first time I held her, I loved her more than anything else in the world because I gave her so much benefit of the doubt, right? I loved her so much. And yet, when we grow up, somehow we lose that, right? We think that people are trying to be mean to us, as if like a baby, when a baby is crying, that they're trying to annoy us. A baby isn't trying to annoy us. That's the tools they have. And we give them all this benefit of the doubt because we know that that's the best they can do. What else can they do? They can only cry. That's all they got when they need something. And so that's the attitude, that's the mantra I try to repeat to myself whenever I have an interpersonal annoyance, that we're all just operating with the best tools we have, that we're all grown up babies. And so when I can think to myself, love is measured by the benefit of the doubt, whether that's the love I give to a very close member of my family or to my fellow human being, we're just all operating with the best of tools that we have.
Hmm. 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 Nir, congratulations on the book. It's coming out tomorrow. And any links that you want to share?
Absolutely. So if you go to my website, nirandfar.com, that's spelled like my first name, Nir and far.com. There's actually a workbook there, a 30-day belief transformation journal that's absolutely free. We couldn't fit it into the final edition of the book, so we decided to make it available online for free. And you can get that download on the website, nirandfar.com.
Fantastic. We will include that link in the show notes. Nir, thank you so much for joining today. Congrats on the latest book.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Will.